Welcome back to Mimir'sWellFolklore. I've kind of slowed down video production lately because I was feeling kind of burnt out, but I fully intend to keep at it. It may be difficult in the following months now, however, since I am starting school. I'm going to start on this channel discussing the sagas and perhaps fairy tales and such, analyzing them and providing insight. This will by necessity take on a different format than my usual videos do, because rather than just spitting out a list of facts, the way you would become familiar with the topic is to actually just hear the story. With that out of the way, today we will be discussing Harbarthsljoth, or in English, Graybeard's song from the poetic Edda. I quite like Harbarthsljoth, actually. I find it hilarious. I should first like to mention what the poetic Edda is. In the 13th century, Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic monk, recorded a number of Old Norse poems, and it is easily the most important source for Norse mythology in existence. It is, however, important to realize that these were recorded only as an oral tradition for an unknowable number of centuries before being written down, and when they were recorded, they had already faded into obscurity a bit. And those who had the time and capacity to record such things were rich nobles, hence Snorri Sturluson being a Christian monk. Christians hated and feared anything pagan, so it is remarkable that these poems were able to be recorded at all, and many have speculated that they may have been tampered with as to be more palatable for the Christian readers. In the records of Irish mythology, for example, this is a lot more pronounced and therefore more obvious. They have the Irish creation story replaced with the Christian one, mentioning Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and things like that. It says that their gods originate in Greece and that the Irish people defeated their gods in a war. These details are wildly out of place, and the lattermost seems to be an attempt to disparage and insult the native Irish faith. They were essentially telling the Irish heathens that their gods were weak, and therefore weaker than the Christian God, so much so that their own ancestors were able to overthrow them. I bring up Irish legend because whatever manipulation exists in the Eddas is more hard to detect or be sure of. So it is unwise to trust the Eddas too much as being perfectly accurate records. Many in modern neo-pagan circles will make the mistake of treating the Eddas as infallible like the Christian Bible. With that out of the way, I'll give you my own personal retelling of Harbarthsljoth, Graybeard's song. I've tried to make it sort of shorter and more concise. I'm going off of Jackson Crawford's translation of the Edda, who incidentally has his own fantastic YouTube channel about ancient Norse language, mythology, and culture, which I would feel indecent not to mention. So, without further ado, here it is. Thor was on his way back from the east, doing whatever it is that Thor does in the east, when he came across a fjord that could only be crossed by ferry. He saw a ferryman across the fjord to whom he called, "Who are you across the fjord?" This question was answered with another, "Who are you who calls from across the water?" Thor responded, "Take me across this fjord, and I will give you the rest of my awesome breakfast. I've got some goat and herring in here." The ferryman said, "You're bragging about your breakfast, and I wouldn't be so eager to arrive home anyway. I think your mother is dead." To which Thor's response was, "You're just saying something that would upset anybody." The ferryman met his request for more personalized insults. "You look like you're a bad farmer. Your clothes are shit too. Not even a decent pair of pants." Thor, becoming more frustrated for a ride, said, "Just row the boat over. And who owns that vessel anyway? The ferryman responded, The boat is Hildolf's from Rathsayarsund. He said only to rent my boat out to good men, not horse thieves and beggars. How about you tell me what your name is if you want to cross the fjord? Thor said, I'll tell you my name. I'm from a proud family. I am Thor, son of Odin, brother of Mali, father of Magni. You're talking to Thor, warrior of the gods. I should like to know what your name is as well. Graybeard is my name, the ferryman responded, and that's something I rarely lie about. Thor said, Why would you lie about your name unless to conceal a crime? Graybeard responded, Whether or not I've committed a crime, I would defend my life from people like you, unless my fated day had come. Thor, getting more mad, said, You aren't worth wetting my clothes in the river to beat your ass, but when I get over there, you will pay for what you have said. Graybeard said, I'll be waiting here for you. I think I'll be your toughest enemy since Hrungnir. Thor said, The arrogant giant Hrungnir lay flat on his back when I was done with him. What were you doing meanwhile, Graybeard? Graybeard said, I was on the island of Algrun for 5 years with Fjolvar. We waged war, killed people, and sampled the local ladies. For some reason Thor asked, How were the women? Graybeard said, Some girls kicked, some were docile, some were wise, and some were loyal. Some would submit to my will. They would even create thread out of sand if I asked them, which, believe me, is difficult. I once slept with 7 sisters and had their charms all to myself. What were you doing meanwhile, Thor? Thor said, I killed the giant Thjassi and tossed his eyes into the sky, which all can see every night amongst the stars. That monument to my deeds will hang in space forever. What were you doing meanwhile, Graybeard? Great feats of seduction, Graybeard responded. In the night I was ridden by women I stole from their husbands. Hlebbrath was a strong giant. He gave me a magic wand, and I enchanted away his wits. You repaid him poorly for a good gift, said Thor. Graybeard said, A tree has only the space it can crowd another out of. Everyone must look out for themselves. What were you doing meanwhile, Thor? Thor said, I was in the east fighting giants, wicked women who lived in the mountains. There wouldn't be a single human left on Midgard if not for my deeds. What were you doing meanwhile, Graybeard? Graybeard said, I was in the south making war. I turned princes against one another and never made peace. Odin receives the powerful men who died in battle, and Thor receives their servants. Thor said, You deal out victory and defeat unfairly if you have so much power. Graybeard said, You're strong but a coward, Thor. Like a prince of cowards, you got stepped on when you hid. You didn't look much like Thor then. You didn't dare sneeze or break wind when you hid in the giant Fjalar's glove. Graybeard, you bitch. I'll kill you if I get across this fjord, said Thor. I'm not sure how you plan on doing that without a boat, Graybeard said. Tell me, Thor, what were you doing meanwhile? I was in the east guarding a river, Thor said. The sons of Svarang threw rocks at me, but got little out of it. In the end they begged for peace. What were you doing meanwhile, Graybeard? Graybeard said, I was in the east with a certain lovely someone. I spent quite some time with her. I showed that blonde a good time, and she did to me. Thor said, You had beautiful women there, eh? Graybeard said, I could have used your help, Thor. You could have helped me hold that gorgeous woman down. Thor said, I would have helped if I were there. Graybeard said, I would trust you for that if you hadn't tricked me before. It's not as though I'm some old cheap shoe that bites at your heels, Thor said. Graybeard said, What were you doing meanwhile? I fought some wicked women, brides of berserkers of Hlessi who had assaulted many, said Thor. Graybeard said, How shameful of you, Thor, fighting women. They were more like wolves than women, Thor said. They wrecked my ship and threatened me and chased away my servant Thjalfi. What were you doing meanwhile, Graybeard? I was with an army. We came this way to wave some war banners and bloody some spears, said Graybeard. Thor said, Now you're telling me you came to do the gods evil? Graybeard said, I'll give you this ring to make up for it. A fair judge would call it even. Where did you learn to spit out such awful words? Asked Thor. I have never heard more awful talk. I learned this sort of talk from the old men who live in the forests of home, said Graybeard. You give a good name to burial mounds if you call them the forests of home, said Thor. Graybeard said, That is how I talk about such things. I'll repay your words with a good beating if I get across this fjord, said Thor. I bet you'll howl louder than a wolf if ever you felt my hammer. Your wife has a lover, Thor, said Graybeard. You'll meet him when you get home, and then you'll suffer. Save your hammer for him. You just lie left and right just to say whatever will anger me the most, said Thor. You're lying, you cowardly fool. I'm telling the truth, said Graybeard, but you're already late. Even when you walk all day and night, you won't get home. Thor said, Graybeard, you bitch, you're the one who held me up. Graybeard said, I didn't think that Thor would let some peasant hold him up on his journey. Thor said, Here's some advice. Row that boat over here to end this bickering. Let's settle this face to face. Graybeard said, Go away. You don't get to ride the ferry. Then show me the way around if you won't let me across, said Thor. That request I will not deny, said Graybeard. It's a long walk. Go to the tree, then the rock, then turn left until you reach Midgard. There your mother, the earth, will show you the way to Asgard. Can I get there today? Asked Thor. I suspect if you hurry, you could be there before sundown, said Graybeard. Thor said, I see this conversation is over, since you only respond with insults. If ever we meet again, you will regret this delay. Graybeard said, Go now and have a bad journey. Okay, so now that we've read the passage, there are a few parts of it I want to talk about. The first and main topic I wanted to bring up in this video is the question, who is Harbarth/Graybeard? Now, it is known that Harbarth is one of Odin's name, so it's sort of implied that it's Odin that we're talking to. And most people I have seen talk about this, it ends there. And scholars generally believe and will say and repeat that this is Odin. Today, I am going to argue that it is Loki and not Odin, and that there is little, if any, reason to think that Harbarth is Odin. Now, we know that Harbarth is one of the names of Odin, but in this passage, I do not believe that Harbarth is actually Harbarth. I think that the so-called Harbarth in this poem is actually Loki calling himself Harbarth. Early on, Harbarth implies that he is lying about his name. The stanza directly from Jackson Crawford's translation is as follows. Graybeard is my name, I rarely lie about that. Why would he mention that he rarely lies about his name unless to imply that he sometimes does? So we don't have solid reason to think that this is actually Harbarth that Odin is talking to. Now, I guess you could say that since Graybeard is one of Odin's name, that when Odin calls himself Harbarth, it is to lie, and that Harbarth is a sort of pseudonym, but I tend to disagree with that. A feature of Old Germanic literature was to use variation. You would call people by different names regularly to avoid monotony and repetition. Also, in Germanic culture, people were assigned multiple names throughout their lives by different people. You would call someone the wise or the pure or whatever, for example. People were given different names that marked their accomplishments and traits. There's nothing out of the ordinary at all with Odin having many names. So when he says he's lying about his name, to me that can only imply that he is not Harbarth, which is Odin, and he is therefore not Odin. There are a few other details in the text that add to this. Right at the beginning, he jabs Thor by saying his mother died. Odin is the father of Thor, so it kind of doesn't work as a jab, since he should care about that too. Also, when he does this, Thor doesn't believe him, and he knows that it's just a jab against him. Why wouldn't Thor believe his own father telling him that his mother died? Also, later in the text, when Harbarth is bragging about the many women he's laid with, Thor says that he would have helped hold down the pretty blonde. I don't care how different a culture the ancient Norse would have had. I disagree that it would ever be normal for a father and son to wingman each other. If your dad is talking about having sex with many women who are incidentally not your mother, no way are you going to be like, hell yeah, get some, bro. And even worse than that, they're talking about rape. I kind of hoped that maybe hold her down could have been figurative, but looking at other translations, I don't get that impression. Anyway, Thor's willingness to act as a sort of wingman implies the kind of relationship that Thor and Loki would have as friends, rather than Loki and Odin as father and son. For all these details in the text that make me think it's Loki, I have no reasons personally that I have thought of that make me think that it could be Odin. Moreover, the whole tone of the text is different than how it is with Odin. All of Odin's poems in the Eddas paint him as a wise, good old man who values hospitality and honor. The only other text with Loki is Lokasenna, which is also the only other text that consists entirely of insults. This behavior does not at all jive with the way Odin acts, yet totally makes sense for Loki. I would have to talk to someone more informed about this, but I don't see much of anyone talking about this at all. So I could be completely wrong, but as it stands, with what I know, I almost want to ask these scholars, did you even read the Eddas? With that point aside, I also wanted to talk about the confusing bit where Harbarth mentions the forests of home, and Thor is taken aback that he would talk about burial mounds so highly. I wasn't sure what this meant, and after searching it a lot more extensively than I even needed to bother to, apparently no one else on Earth seems to know either. So I guess all we know about the text is that Harbarth hangs about in graveyards and that's taboo, which is understandable because even in modern society that would be taken as strange. You aren't meant to just go for a walk in the graveyard. The living and dead aren't meant to mingle in basically every culture. So somehow forests of home communicates graveyards, but it's sort of a poetic way of saying that. In old Germanic literature and speech, there was something called a kenning. I love kennings. I think they're wonderful. A kenning is a poetic way of speaking around something. Some examples that I know from Old English are that you would call the sea a whale road, because it's a road for whales, I guess, and you would call a sword a crow feeder, because you would kill someone and their corpse would be left for the crows, which is pretty metal, honestly. I wish that we still used these in our modern speech, and presumably you could just make them up. Anyway, I wonder if Harbarth was using forests of home as a sort of kenning, but we don't necessarily get the symbolism. Since in Germanic mythology people were made out of the trees, with Ask and Embla being the first two humans, having their names mean ash and elm respectively, so a group of people was sometimes referred to as a forest. So forests of home may refer to a kind of people rather than a place. However, I did see another translation where they called it hills of home, meaning that whatever Old Norse word they used can also be interpreted as meaning hills. I know nothing about Old Norse, so I cannot comment about this without any more detail than that. Well, that's about all the discussion I have about Harbarthsljoth. What did you guys think? Honestly, I really love it. The idea of these gods, whether it be Loki and Thor or Odin and Thor, engaged in a dick measuring contest is hilarious. The way that they one-up each other constantly with the "what were you doing meanwhile" is excellent. Thor brags about killing monsters and saving the world, and Harbarth just brags about all the sex he has. Hysterical. I think it makes both characters deeper and sort of more relatable as both of their flaws are exposed, with Thor's solution to everything being smash it with a hammer. And when he talks about the wolf-like women who wreck his ship, I've actually seen that being interpreted based on their names, the sort of etymology of their names, that the women were actually waves and he got caught in a storm. And Harbarth calls him cowardly when he hid in a glove. So I think the idea here is that when the solution isn't simply hit it with a hammer, it doesn't always work out for him. And when Thor says he would help Harbarth hold down a woman, it's this idea that he would just go along with things because he holds onto loyalty and honors really tightly. As for Harbarth's flaws, well, he's just an asshole, honestly. And with that, see you guys next time.